I sold the only house I had ever owned. Not because I wanted to, but because my son told me it was the only way to help him. He looked me in the eyes, his voice shaking, saying it was urgent, that if I didn't act fast, everything in his life would fall apart. And I believed him. I didn't ask questions. I didn't hesitate. I signed the papers and handed over everything I had built in 40 years to my own son. At first, I told myself I had done the right thing, that this is what a mother does, that sacrifices are part of love. But something didn't feel right. The way he avoided my calls. The way he changed the subject whenever I asked about the money. The way his voice went cold, like I was no longer part of his life after I gave him what he wanted. Then one night, I saw something I was never supposed to see. And in that moment, I realized the truth wasn't just painful. It was unforgivable. My name is Margaret, and I'm 67 years old. I spent most of my life working the same job, raising my son alone after his father walked away when he was still a child. Everything I had, every dollar I saved, every sacrifice I made was for him. That house wasn't just a place to live. It was my security, my memories, my proof that I had done something right in this life. When my son came to me that day, he didn't look like the boy I raised. He looked desperate, almost broken. He told me he was in trouble, serious trouble. He said he needed money. A lot of money, and fast. I asked him what happened, but he wouldn't explain. He just kept repeating that if I loved him, I would trust him. And that was enough to silence me. I didn't question him. I didn't push. I didn't demand answers. 'Cause deep down, I didn't want to believe that my own son could ever put me in a position where I had to choose between my home and him. So I chose him. But what I didn't know was that this decision would cost me far more than just a house. The day he came to see me, I remember noticing something was off before he even said a word. He didn't hug me like he used to, didn't smile. His eyes kept moving around the room like he was somewhere else, or like he didn't want to look at me for too long. I asked if everything was okay, but he just sat down, leaned forward, and stayed silent for a few seconds that felt longer than they should have. When he finally spoke, his voice sounded heavy, controlled, like he had rehearsed what he was about to say. He told me he needed help. Not the kind of help I had given him before. This time it was different. This time it was urgent. He said there were things happening in his life that he couldn't explain, at least not yet, but that if I didn't trust him now, it could be too late. I felt a tightness in my chest the moment he said that. Not fear, not exactly. It was something deeper, something that didn't sit right. But I pushed it away. Because when your child is sitting in front of you asking for help, your instinct isn't to doubt, it's to protect. He started talking about debts, about pressure, about people he didn't want to involve me with. Every sentence was vague, incomplete, but emotionally loaded. It felt like he was telling me just enough to make me worry, but not enough to understand what was really going on. And somehow, that made me more likely to say yes. Then he said it. He told me the only way out, the only real solution was money. Not a loan, not a small amount, everything. He needed everything I had access to. And he needed it fast. That's when I felt it. That moment where something inside you whispers, "This doesn't make sense." But I ignored it. Because right after that, he looked at me and said the one thing he knew I wouldn't be able to resist. "If you trust me, I'll fix everything." And in that moment, I chose trust over truth. The idea of selling the house didn't come all at once. At first, he mentioned smaller options. Taking out a loan, asking someone for help, trying to figure something out. But every option he brought up, he dismissed right after. Too slow. Too risky. Not enough. It felt like he was guiding me, step by step, toward a conclusion I didn't want to reach. And then, almost casually, he said it. "What about the house?" The room went silent after that. I didn't respond right away. I just looked at him, trying to understand if he really meant it. That house wasn't just a property. It was my life. Every memory of raising him. Every Christmas. Every quiet night after a long day of work. It was all there. Selling it wasn't just a financial decision. It was letting go of everything I had left. I told him that. I told him I needed time to think. But he didn't like that answer. His tone changed. Not aggressively, but cold. Distant. He leaned back in his chair and said something I still hear in my head to this day. I thought you trusted me. It wasn't loud. It wasn't dramatic. But it hit harder than anything else he had said. From that moment on, it stopped being about money. It became about proving my love. Over the next few days he called me constantly. Not to talk, but to remind me. To create urgency. To make me feel like every hour that passed was making things worse. He never gave details. Never explained exactly what was happening. But he made sure I felt the pressure. Barely slept. I kept walking around the house at night. Touching the walls. Looking at old photos. Trying to convince myself that this was temporary. That I was helping him rebuild his life. That one day, we would look back at this and laugh. So I made the decision. I called a real estate agent. Everything after that moved fast. Too fast. Within days, there were people walking through my home. Strangers opening doors, looking at rooms that held decades of my life, speaking in numbers, in offers, in timelines, as if none of it meant anything. And maybe, to them, it didn't. But to me, it was everything. The day I signed the papers, my hands were shaking. Not because I didn't understand what I was doing, but because deep down, I knew I couldn't undo it. The day the money finally came through, everything felt unreal. I remember sitting at the bank, staring at numbers on a screen that didn't look like mine anymore. That money wasn't just a transaction. It was my entire life. Converted into something cold, digital. Ready to be transferred in seconds. He was there with me. Quiet. Focused, almost impatient, not nervous, not emotional, just ready. I tried to talk to him while we waited. Tried to slow things down even just for a moment. I asked again what exactly was going on, what kind of situation required this much urgency, this much sacrifice. But he barely looked at me. He just said, "I'll explain everything later." Later. That word should have meant something. But at that moment, I let it go. When the transfer was completed, I felt something inside me shift. Not relief, not peace. Just emptiness. Like something had been taken from me that I couldn't quite name yet. I looked at him expecting something. Gratitude. Emotion. Even just a sign that this mattered. But he didn't react the way I imagined. He stood up, checked his phone, and said he needed to leave. Just like that. No hug. No pause. No moment between us to acknowledge what had just happened. I told myself he was stressed. That whatever he was dealing with must be serious. That I shouldn't make it about me. So I let him go. That was the last normal moment we ever had. After that day, things changed. First, it was subtle. He took longer to answer my calls. His messages became shorter, colder. If I asked how he was, he would reply hours later with something vague like busy or everything's fine. But it didn't feel fine. Days turned into weeks. And the more time passed, the less I knew about my own son. I started noticing things I had ignored before. The way he avoided details. The way every conversation felt controlled. Like he was only telling me what he wanted me to hear. It wasn't just distance. It was intentional. And that's when the doubt started growing. Not loud, not clear. Just a quiet voice in the back of my mind asking one question. What did he really do with the money? Didn't happen all at once. There wasn't a dramatic revelation. No phone call. No confession. Just a small detail. Something that didn't fit. One afternoon, I was sitting alone in the small apartment I had rented after selling the house. It still didn't feel like home. The walls were bare. The silence was heavier than it should have been. I picked up my phone, more out of habit than expectation, and decided to check his social media. I don't know why I did it. Maybe intuition. Maybe something inside me already knew. First, everything looked normal. Old photos, random posts, nothing unusual. But then, I saw something that made me pause. Picture. Recently posted. He was smiling. Not just smiling, relaxed. Carefree. Standing in front of a place I didn't recognize. It looked expensive. Clean. Modern. Not the kind of place someone in serious trouble would be spending time in. I stared at the image longer than I should have. Zoomed in. Looked at the details. And that's when I saw it. Car. Behind him. Not just any car. New one. Shiny. Untouched. The kind of car you don't just end up with when you're struggling. My heart sank slowly. Not all at once, but enough for me to feel it. I tried to rationalize it. Maybe it wasn't his. Maybe it belonged to a friend. Maybe there was an explanation. So I did what I had been avoiding this whole time. Called him. Rang. And rang. And rang. No answer. I waited a few minutes and tried again. Nothing. That same night I sent him a message. Simple. Just asking how he was. And casually mentioning the picture I had seen. He replied hours later. One sentence. Just a friend's car. Don't worry. No explanation. No detail. No attempt to reassure me. Just distance. That's when something inside me finally shifted. Not completely, but enough. For the first time, I stopped trying to protect him in my mind. And started looking at the situation for what it might actually be. 'Cause deep down, I knew one thing. People who are in real trouble don't look like that. After that message, something inside me refused to go back to how things were before. It wasn't just about the car anymore. It was the way he answered me. Cold. Dismissive. Like I was asking something I had no right to question. That's what stayed with me. That's what didn't let me sleep that night. So the next morning, I did something I hadn't done in years. I started paying attention. Not as a mother trying to protect her son, but as someone trying to understand the truth. I went back to that photo. Looked at it again. This time more carefully. Not emotionally, but deliberately. I zoomed in on everything. The background. The building. The street signs. Even the reflection on the car's surface. And slowly, pieces started forming. That place wasn't random. It was specific. Clean architecture. New construction. A high-end residential area. I had seen places like that before, but never from the inside. And definitely not connected to my son, who just weeks ago claimed he was drowning in problems. My hands felt cold as I realized something simple. If he was in trouble, he wasn't living like someone in trouble. I opened my laptop and started searching. Took time. More than I expected. But eventually, found it. The exact building. Luxury apartments. High price range. The kind of place you don't visit casually. Unless you belong there. Or you just bought your way in. I sat there staring at the screen, my heart beating slower, heavier. Like it already knew what I was about to accept. I needed more. I checked his recent activity again. Different platforms. Different angles. And little by little patterns started appearing. Photos that didn't match his story. Locations that didn't align with someone desperate. Subtle signs. But consistent. Too consistent. At that point, it wasn't suspicion anymore. It was direction. And for the first time, I asked myself something I had been avoiding since the beginning. What if he lied to me from the start? That question didn't bring clarity. It brought something worse. Silence. Because once you allow that possibility into your mind, everything else begins to make sense. I wish I could say I accepted it right away. That I saw the signs, connected the dots, and faced the truth like a strong, rational person. But that's not what happened. Because when the truth involves your own child, your mind doesn't go straight to logic. It goes to denial. I kept telling myself there had to be an explanation. Something I wasn't seeing. Something that would make all of this make sense again. I replayed every conversation we had in my head. Every word. Every pause. Looking for something I might have misunderstood. But the more I revisited those moments, the clearer they became. He never gave details. He never explained anything fully. He just made me feel urgency. And asked for trust. And I gave it to him. Without limits. Without conditions. That realization didn't come like a shock. It came slowly, painfully. Like something settling into place that had always been there. Waiting for me to see it. I stood up from the table and walked to the window. The street outside was quiet. Normal. People going on with their lives. Unaware that mine had just changed in a way I couldn't undo. And for the first time since all of this began, I allowed myself to feel it. Not confusion. Not doubt. But something much heavier. Betrayal. Not just because of what he might have done, but because of how easily he did it. How calmly he asked me to give up everything. Knowing exactly what it meant to me. That's what hurt the most. Not the house. Not the money. But the realization that my trust wasn't sacred to him. Was useful. I closed my eyes and took a deep breath. Because at that point, there were only two choices left. Keep pretending. Or finally face him. And deep down, I already knew which one I was going to choose. I didn't tell him I was coming. I didn't warn him. Didn't ask for permission. I just got ready that morning, took a deep breath and went. The address I had found the night before was still open on my phone. I checked it again before leaving. Just to make sure I wasn't making a mistake. Part of me still hoped I was wrong. That I would get there and realize everything had a simple explanation. But deep down, I knew I wouldn't. The building was exactly like the photos. Modern. Clean. Expensive. The kind of place that feels quiet in a way that doesn't come from peace. But from distance. Like the people who live there don't have to deal with the same problems as everyone else. I stood outside for a moment just looking at it. Trying to understand how my son, the same boy I raised with so little, could now be here. While I was in a rented apartment with nothing left. Then I walked in. No one stopped me. No one questioned me. I took the elevator, my heart beating harder with every floor. When the doors opened, I already knew which apartment it was. I didn't knock softly. I knocked with certainty. Took a few seconds. Then the door opened. And there he was. For a brief moment, we just stared at each other. His face changed instantly. Not surprised, not relieved, just uncomfortable. Like I wasn't supposed to be there. "Mom," he said, almost under his breath. I didn't smile. I didn't step back. I just looked past him. Into the apartment. And everything I needed to know was right there. New furniture. Clean lines. Expensive finishes. Nothing about that place looked temporary. Nothing about it looked like someone in trouble. I looked back at him. And for the first time, I didn't see my son. I saw someone who had taken everything from me. And built something else with it. "Can I come in?" he asked. He hesitated. Just for a second. But it was enough. Because in that hesitation, felt it. The confirmation I had been trying to avoid. He stepped aside. I walked in. And that's when I realized. This wasn't just a misunderstanding. It was a lie. The moment I stepped inside, the silence between us became heavy. He closed the door slowly behind me like he was buying himself time. I could feel it. Every movement. Every second. Was him trying to think of what to say next. But I didn't give him that space. I walked a few steps into the apartment, letting my eyes move across everything again. The furniture. The finishes. The details. It wasn't just expensive. It was intentional. Planned. Built. With money that used to be mine. I turned to him. "When were you going to tell me?" My voice wasn't loud. It wasn't angry. And somehow, that made it worse. He looked away almost immediately. "It's not what you think," he said. That sentence. The one people use when it is exactly what you think. I took a step closer. Then explain it to me. He ran his hand through his hair, pacing slightly now. Not panicking, but clearly uncomfortable. Like someone trying to control a situation that was slipping out of his hands. I was going to tell you, he said. I just needed time. That word again. Time to do what? Time to hide it better. Time to make sure I wouldn't find out. I shook my head slowly. You told me you were in trouble. I was, he replied quickly. But this doesn't look like trouble. That's when he stopped moving. For a second, just a second, I saw something real in his expression. Not guilt. Not regret. Something else. Calculation. I used the money to fix things, he said. You don't understand everything that was going on. Then help me understand. Silence. He didn't answer. Because there was nothing to explain that could make this right. I looked around one more time, letting the reality settle completely. You didn't need help, I said quietly. You needed money. He didn't deny it. That was the moment. The exact moment everything broke. Because denial would have been easier. A lie would have been easier. But that silence, that acceptance without saying it, was the truth. And it was worse than anything he could have told me. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't cry. I just stood there waiting. Because at that point, there was only one thing left for him to do. Tell the truth. He took a deep breath, looked away again, and walked toward the kitchen like he needed distance from me to say what he was about to say. He leaned against the counter, arms crossed, staring at the floor for a few seconds. Then he spoke. I wasn't in trouble the way you think. Of course he wasn't. I stayed silent. I had debts, but not like I told you. It wasn't urgent. I just saw an opportunity. An opportunity. That word felt colder than any lie he had told before. I've been trying to move up, he continued. To get out of the situation I was in. To finally build something for myself. And I knew I needed a push, real money, to make it happen. I felt my chest tighten again. But this time it wasn't confusion. It was clarity. You used me, I said. He shook his head quickly. No, that's not fair. Not fair. I almost laughed. But nothing about that moment was funny. I invested the money, he went on. I bought this place. I put the rest into a business. Things are starting to work. This, he gestured around the apartment. This is just the beginning. The beginning. For him. Then. For me. I looked at him. Really looked at him. Trying to find something familiar in his face. Something that reminded me of the boy I had raised. The one who used to care, who used to feel. But all I saw was someone who had already justified everything. Someone who believed this was acceptable. You lied to me, I said. I did what I had to do, he replied. No hesitation. No regrets. Just certainty. That was the moment it became irreversible. Because it wasn't just about the house anymore. It wasn't just about the money. It was about the realization that my sacrifice was never a sacrifice to him. It was a strategy, and I was part of it. For a few seconds, I couldn't say anything. Not because I didn't have words, but because none of them seemed strong enough to carry what I was feeling. I had spent my entire life believing that love meant giving, that being a mother meant sacrificing, without expecting anything in return. And for years, that belief guided every decision I made. But standing there, in that apartment, looking at what he had built with what used to be my life, something inside me shifted. Not suddenly, but permanently. I took a slow breath and looked around one last time. The place was quiet, perfect, controlled, exactly how he wanted it. And then I realized something that hurt more than everything else combined. He wasn't sorry. Not even a little. There was no hesitation in him. No doubt. No conflict. He had already made peace with what he did. Which meant, I was the only one still holding on to something that no longer existed. I looked back at him. I gave you everything, I said. He didn't respond. Because there was nothing he could say that would change that. I didn't just give you money. I gave you my home, my security, my life. Still nothing. Just silence. And in that silence, I understood something I had never allowed myself to understand before. Love without limits becomes permission. Permission to take. Permission to cross lines. Permission to treat someone like they will always forgive. No matter what. I nodded slowly. Not in agreement, but in acceptance. This was the last thing I could ever give you, I said quietly. That got his attention. He looked at me for the first time. Really looked. What do you mean? He asked. I held his gaze. I mean, there's nothing left. The words didn't come out with anger. They came out clean, final. Because in that moment, I made a decision I never thought I would make. Not to fight. Not to argue. Not to beg for an explanation. But to walk away. Not just from the apartment, but from everything he had become. I turned toward the door. And for the first time in my life, chose myself. Walking out of that apartment felt different from anything I had ever experienced. It wasn't anger. It wasn't even sadness in the way I was used to feeling it. It was quiet. A kind of silence that comes when something inside you finally stops resisting reality. I stepped outside the building and stood there for a moment, looking at the same place that, just minutes before, had taken the last piece of illusion I still held. People walked by, cars passed. Life continued like nothing had happened. But for me, everything had changed. The hardest part wasn't losing the house. It wasn't even the money. It was understanding that the person I had trusted the most had never seen my sacrifice the way I did. I went back to my apartment that day, sat down in the same chair, and let the silence settle again. But this time, it didn't feel empty. Felt honest. There were no more questions. No more maybe I misunderstood. No more hope that things would go back to how they were. Because they wouldn't. And strangely, that brought clarity. Days passed. Then weeks. He didn't call. He didn't text. And I didn't reach out. Not because I stopped loving him, but because I finally understood something I should have learned a long time ago. Love doesn't mean losing yourself. Love doesn't mean accepting anything. And trust, once broken like that, doesn't come back the same. I started rebuilding slowly. Not financially. Not yet. But emotionally. Piece by piece. Day by day. Learning how to exist again. Without carrying the weight of someone else's choices. And one night, sitting alone again, I realized something that surprised even me. I didn't regret walking away. Because for the first time in years, I wasn't waiting for someone else to do the right thing. I was doing it for myself. If there's one thing this experience taught me, it's this. The people closest to you are not always the ones who value you the most. And sometimes, the hardest decision you'll ever make is the one that finally protects you. So let me ask you something. Would you have done the same? Or would you have stayed, hoping things would change?